In August 1966, two young electronics technicians from Brazil vanished while on what appeared to be a routine trip. 3 days later, on Morro do Vintém Hill in Niterói, a boy flying a kite made a discovery that would create one of the most bizarre unsolved mysteries in South American history. Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana were found lying side by side on the hilltop, dressed in formal suits and wearing homemade lead eye masks that completely covered their eyes. The masks appeared to be fashioned from thin metal plates, cut roughly into the shape of sunglasses but with no eye holes. They were designed to block vision entirely. Both men were also wearing waterproof coats, despite the warm weather, and their bodies showed no signs of wounds, struggle, or violence of any kind. It was as if they had simply laid down together and peacefully passed away, leaving behind one of the most puzzling crime scenes investigators had ever encountered. Near their bodies, searchers discovered an empty water bottle, wet towels, and most mysteriously of all, a notebook containing what appeared to be instructions written in Portuguese. The note read like a timeline for some kind of ritual. 1630, be at the specified location. 1830, ingest capsules. After the effect, protect metals. Await signal, mask. The cryptic message suggested the men were following a precise schedule, expecting to take some kind of substance at 6:30 p.m., then put on their lead masks while waiting for a signal from an unknown source. But a signal from whom? And why did they need to shield their eyes and protect metals? Therefore, investigators began piecing together the men's final movements, hoping to understand what had led them to this remote hilltop. They discovered that Cruz and Viana had been last seen on September 17, 1966, leaving their hometown of Campos dos Goitacazes for Niterói. The men had arrived in the city and were observed purchasing waterproof raincoats and bottled water, items that were later found at the scene. A waitress at a local establishment remembered Miguel acting nervously and constantly checking his watch, as if he was anxious about meeting some kind of deadline. When their bodies were discovered on August 20th, they were positioned carefully on the hilltop, partly covered by grass. Each man wore his formal suit, the homemade lead eye shield, and the newly purchased raincoat. The scene looked almost ritualistic in its precision. An autopsy was ordered to determine the cause of death, but delays in the overcrowded coroner's office meant that by the time the examination could be performed, the men's internal organs were too decomposed for proper toxicological analysis. This crucial delay meant that if the men had ingested poison or drugs, as their note suggested, no trace could be detected. Local police and firefighters had recovered the bodies after the boy reported his discovery, but despite extensive investigation, authorities were never able to identify any suspects or determine exactly what had happened on that hilltop. The victims' families, particularly their bereaved parents, questioned the official findings and refused to accept that their sons had simply taken their own lives. According to friends who spoke with police, both men had been involved in what they called spiritualist science, possibly attempting to make contact with extraterrestrial beings. This revelation led to the most detailed theory about what had occurred. According to this explanation, Cruz and Viana had been acting as amateur scientists or occultists who believed they were going to encounter beings from another world. They may have taken psychedelic drugs and created the lead eye masks to shield themselves from the anticipated bright light of an alien spacecraft. The elaborate instructions found in their notebooks supported this ritualistic interpretation, suggesting they were following some kind of predetermined protocol for making contact with otherworldly visitors. Alternative theories ranged from accidental poisoning with cyanide capsules to involvement in cult activities, or even elimination by unknown assailants who had somehow forced them to participate in this bizarre scene. However, the complete absence of any signs of struggle suggested that whatever happened, the men had participated willingly. UFO enthusiasts pointed to the lead masks and cryptic timeline as evidence that the men had indeed been preparing for an extraterrestrial encounter. Skeptics noted that the lack of violence suggested either a suicide pact or a tragic accident involving experimental drugs. The lead masks themselves remain one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. These thin metal goggles fashioned by the men serve no clear practical purpose for any known activity. Their existence suggests advanced planning and a specific belief about what they would encounter. Investigators also discovered materials at the men's homes for mask making and books on spiritualism, supporting the theory that they had been preparing for this event for some time. The case generated sensational news coverage throughout Brazil and remains one of the country's most infamous unsolved mysteries to this day. Internationally, it became a favorite subject on UFO and mystery websites, where it's often cited as potential evidence of extraterrestrial contact. Despite decades of speculation and investigation, there have been no official breakthroughs in understanding what happened to Cruz and Viana. Amateur researchers continue to analyze the limited evidence, as where police notes, the transcribed message, and witness recollections, but no arrests or definitive explanations have emerged in over 50 years. The lead mask's mystery stands as one of the most thoroughly documented, yet completely inexplicable cases in the annals of unexplained deaths, demonstrating how even detailed evidence can sometimes raise more questions than it answers. In December 1948, on Somerton Park Beach in Adelaide, Australia, a well-dressed man was discovered deceased with no identification, launching one of the most enduring mysteries in criminal history. The case of the Somerton Man, also known as the Tamam Shud mystery, has puzzled investigators for over 70 years and continues to generate new theories about espionage, unrequited love, and coded messages. On December 1st, 1948, a young woman taking an early morning walk found the body of a man lying against the seawall, appearing as if he had simply sat down and never woken up. He was impeccably dressed in a neat suit and tie, though investigators would later discover that all clothing labels had been systematically removed. Near the body, police found a half-empty bottle of disinfectant and a small carpet bag containing unusual items: a screwdriver, a stenciling brush, an army kit bag, and a box of capsules whose contents could not be identified with the forensic technology available at the time. The most significant clue was discovered hidden in the man's fob pocket, a small scrap of paper bearing the Persian words Tamam Shud, meaning ended or finished. The paper had been torn from a copy of Omar Khayyam's Rubaiyat, a collection of Persian poetry that was quite rare in 1940s Australia. Therefore, investigators launched an extensive effort to identify the mysterious man and understand how he had come to be on that Adelaide beach. His fingerprints were circulated internationally, and his description was shared with police forces around the world, but no one could identify him. Witnesses described seeing a well-dressed stranger in the area on November 30th, 1948, but these sightings provided no clues to his identity or purpose for being there. The police eventually traced the source of the Tamam Shud paper to a copy of the Rubaiyat that had been found in a car near the beach. This discovery led them to a local nurse who claimed that a patient had given her a copy of the same book. According to her account, this patient had mentioned an unidentified man who had left a fragment of that particular phrase with her, suggesting that the deceased might be that person. The nurse believed the man's name might have been Carl or Charles, but she could provide no concrete information that would help establish his identity or explain his presence in Adelaide. The autopsy revealed no obvious marks of violence or clear cause of death. The coroner listed the cause as unknown, though some internal analysis suggested possible poisoning. However, toxicology testing in the 1940s was extremely limited, and no specific toxin could be identified. Initially, there were reports that the man's stomach contents smelled of bitter almonds, which could indicate cyanide poisoning, but this observation was later disputed by other medical professionals involved in the examination. The deceased appeared to be physically fit with recent dental work, and investigators noted that he had 7 teeth removed, all from the right lower jaw. These dental records were circulated widely, but never matched any known individual. Multiple theories emerged to explain the Somerton man's identity and death. During Australia's Cold War era, many suspected espionage activities, theorizing that he might have been a Soviet spy or an agent involved in intelligence operations who had been eliminated by enemy operatives. Amateur codebreakers published potential solutions to an encrypted message found in the man's suit pocket, though none of these interpretations have ever been officially confirmed. The coded text, consisting of seemingly random letters, continues to puzzle cryptographers decades later. In November 2022, researchers claimed to have partially deciphered the code as text written in Arabic script, but police have not confirmed this interpretation, and the meaning remains unclear. More recently, in 2022, 2 Australian academics claimed the man was Carl Charles Webb, a con artist and former soldier, based on genealogical research and dental record analysis. However, law enforcement has not officially accepted this identification, and the man remains listed as John Doe in official records. Other theories include self-inflicted death for personal reasons, elimination by unknown means, or a case of mistaken identity that resulted in the wrong person being targeted by unknown adversaries. The torn book fragment reading Tamam Shud, meaning ended, adds a poetic finality to the case that has captured public imagination. The phrase appears at the conclusion of the Rubaiyat, suggesting that someone was making a deliberate statement about endings or completion. The systematic removal of all identifying labels and registration numbers from the man's clothing, combined with his cryptic final message, creates an aura of deliberate mystery that continues to fascinate investigators and amateur sleuths alike. South Australia police have kept the case file open and continue to solicit tips from the public. A reward was offered in 2009 for information leading to the man's identification, and in February 2023, detectives opened the case files to journalists and researchers, hoping that fresh perspectives might yield new insights. The alleged identification of the man as Carl Webb by academic researchers remains unproven and unofficial. Police have not closed the case based on this claim, and both the victim's identity and cause of death remain unresolved, despite modern forensic efforts and DNA analysis. The Somerton man case has been called Australia's greatest cold case, capturing public imagination through books, documentaries, and podcasts that regularly revisit the evidence. The combination of the mysterious coded message, the poetic final clue, and the complete absence of identity has made this one of the most analyzed unsolved cases in criminal history. Hey everyone, It's here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you're enjoying. In November 1970, hikers exploring the remote Ice Valley near Bergen, Norway, made a discovery that would become one of the country's most enduring mysteries. They found the severely burned remains of a woman who had systematically erased every trace of her identity, creating a puzzle that investigators have been unable to solve for over 50 years. The victim, who became known as the Isdal woman, was discovered on November 29, 1970, in a remote area called Isdalen. Her body was found in a severely burned state, positioned with her hands carefully placed by her torso, suggesting that someone had arranged her after death. The woman appeared to be between 40 and 60 years old and stood approximately 5 feet 1 inch tall. She had been wearing stylish clothing beneath the charred layers, indicating she had been well dressed before whatever had happened to her. What made this case extraordinary was the methodical removal of every possible clue to her identity. All clothing labels had been deliberately cut out, identification documents had been destroyed, and even her fingerprints and dental records proved useless due to apparent tampering. Therefore, investigators faced the challenge of solving a case where the victim had seemingly erased herself from existence before her death. Police eventually discovered that a woman using various aliases had been staying at several hotels in Bergen and Oslo in the weeks prior to the discovery of the body. Hotel registers showed someone calling herself Ingrid or Lise, checking into different accommodations, and surveillance photographs actually captured images of her during these stays. Witnesses reported seeing her in the company of different older men, though none of these individuals were ever identified. The autopsy revealed that she had consumed high levels of sleeping pills, barbiturates, and had died from carbon monoxide poisoning caused by the fire. However, it remained unclear whether her death was intentional or the result of an accident. Near the crime scene, investigators found burned clothing with all identifying tags removed, along with suitcases that had been deliberately destroyed. Personal items recovered from the scene included multiple wigs, numerous sleeping pills, and a notebook containing coded writing that has never been deciphered. The systematic destruction of identifying information, combined with the multiple aliases and cryptic codes, strongly suggested to Norwegian investigators that they were dealing with someone involved in espionage activities. The timing of the case, during the height of the Cold War, made spy-related theories seem plausible. International media speculated that she might have been an intelligence agent working for one of the major powers, or possibly someone fleeing from a dangerous secret that had caught up with her in that remote Norwegian valley. Later research conducted in 2017 using DNA isotope analysis indicated that the woman might have been born in the Nuremberg area of Germany around 1930. A 2023 report even suggested a possible connection to Nazi-era financial activities. Though none of these theories have been definitively proven, alternative explanations include the possibility that she was a witness to serious crimes who was eliminated to prevent her from testifying, or simply a disoriented traveler who had become involved in something dangerous beyond her understanding. Norwegian detectives led an extensive investigation that included interviewing over 200 people connected to the case. For 40 years, the mystery maintained a legendary status in Norway, capturing public imagination and inspiring numerous theories about international intrigue. Amateur researchers and journalists have published books and conducted investigations, while DNA specialists working on the Isdal project have attempted to identify her using genetic analysis of hair samples, though contamination has complicated their efforts. The case gained renewed international attention through podcast series like Death in Ice Valley which crowdsourced information from listeners around the world and generated new tips for investigators to pursue. In 2022 and 2023, police announced new analysis of travel tickets found in the woman's suitcase, hoping that modern forensic techniques might finally reveal information about her movements before her death. DNA analysis continues, though it remains complicated by decades of contamination and degradation. A reward for information that was first offered in 1971 remains unclaimed to this day. With advances in genetic genealogy and international databases, investigators maintain hope that the Isdal woman might finally be identified and the circumstances of her death explained. The case has become known as Norway's Mona Lisa, due to the enigmatic smile in reconstructed images of her face and the enduring mystery surrounding her identity. Whether she was a spy who met an unfortunate end, a victim of an elaborate criminal conspiracy, or someone who went to extraordinary lengths to disappear from her previous life, her story represents one of the most successful erasures of personal identity ever documented. As of now, both her true name and the exact circumstances that led to her death in that remote Norwegian valley remain completely unknown, making her one of Europe's most haunting unidentified victims. In February 1959, 9 experienced hikers, led by Igor Dyatlov, set out for what should have been a routine skiing expedition in the northern Ural Mountains of Russia. What happened to them during their journey would become one of the most analyzed and debated mysteries in the history of unexplained deaths. The group consisted of students and graduates from Ural Polytechnical Institute in Sverdlovsk, all experienced in wilderness survival and winter camping. They left on January 25, 1959, planning a challenging but manageable trek through the remote mountain region. When the group failed to return as scheduled, a search team was organized to locate them. On February 26, 1959, searchers found their orange tent on the slopes of Kholat Syakhl, which translates to Dead Mountain in the local Mansi language. The tent was half buried under snow and had been cut open from the inside, as if the hikers had frantically slashed their way out in extreme urgency. Most disturbing was the evidence that all 9 had fled into the freezing night, wearing only underwear or light clothing, abandoning their warm gear and survival equipment. Therefore, investigators faced the puzzle of understanding what could have prompted experienced wilderness travelers to rush out into deadly cold without proper protection. The first 2 bodies were discovered near a pine tree, approximately 300 meters from the tent, and the others were scattered at various distances up to 75 meters away as the snow melted in the following weeks. The autopsy findings created even more questions than answers. 2 victims had suffered major skull fractures and chest injuries severe enough to be compared to car crash trauma. Yet they had no external wounds that would explain such devastating internal damage. One victim was found with a missing tongue, and another was missing eyes, though these injuries were likely caused by scavenging animals after death. 5 of the bodies showed clear signs of death by hypothermia, which was expected given their exposure to the extreme cold. Most mysteriously, one hiker was discovered in a seated position, appearing as if he had been alive when found, though he had actually succumbed to hypothermia while sitting upright in the snow. Perhaps the most puzzling discovery was that traces of radioactive material were detected on some of the victims' clothing, though the source and significance of this contamination has never been explained. The Soviet rescue team quickly classified the incident as avalanche-related, and the official cause was listed as an unknown compelling natural force. No military involvement was acknowledged, and authorities showed no interest in investigating possible human causes for the deaths. Missing from the initial investigation were the hikers' diaries and camera film, which were later recovered in the 1990s by family members and revealed through declassified KGB files. These materials provided some insight into the group's final days, but offered no clear explanation for their tragic end. For decades, numerous theories emerged to explain the impossible circumstances. Some suggested KGB involvement in secret weapons testing, noting that the radioactive contamination might support evidence of military experiments in the area. More exotic theories proposed attacks by the legendary Yeti creature, UFO encounters, or panic induced by infrasound, low-frequency wind patterns that can cause disorientation and terror in humans. The slab avalanche theory was long dismissed by investigators due to the seemingly intact tent and lack of obvious avalanche debris around the campsite. However, recent scientific analysis has provided new support for this natural explanation. In 2021, a comprehensive study using modern snow science and computer modeling demonstrated that a delayed slab avalanche could have buried the lower portion of the tent during the night, creating enough pressure and panic to cause the hikers to cut their way out and flee downhill. The study showed that this type of avalanche might leave little surface evidence, while still creating enough force to cause internal injuries and prompt the desperate escape that led to their deaths from exposure. Russian authorities reopened the case in 2020 and conducted a thorough re-examination of all available evidence. In 2021, they officially concluded that a slab avalanche was the most probable cause of the incident, dismissing theories involving attacks, military testing, or supernatural creatures. The official investigation announced its closure in March 2022, confirming that natural phenomena rather than human action had caused the deaths. However, some family members and enthusiasts remain unconvinced by this explanation, noting that it doesn't account for all the unusual details surrounding the case. The Dyatlov Pass incident has achieved legendary status in Russia and internationally, inspiring documentaries, novels, and countless online discussions. Western interest grew significantly after author Donnie Icar's 2013 book brought the case to English-speaking audiences. Despite the official closure of the investigation, internet forums continue to debate the evidence and propose alternative theories. The case remains a powerful example of how natural disasters can create circumstances so unusual that they seem to require supernatural or conspiratorial explanations. The remote location where 9 experienced hikers lost their lives is now known as Dyatlov Pass in their honor, ensuring that their story will continue to fascinate and puzzle people for generations to come. In December 1900, the relief ship Hesperus arrived at the remote Flannan Isles lighthouse off the coast of Scotland to make a routine personnel change, only to discover that all 3 lighthouse keepers had vanished without explanation. The disappearance of James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur would become one of maritime folklore's most enduring enigmas. When the relief crew boarded the lighthouse on December 26, 1900, they found a scene that was both eerily normal and deeply disturbing. Meals had been prepared and left on tables, clocks had stopped at different times, and the lighthouse equipment was in perfect working order. Yet there was no sign of the 3 men who should have been maintaining it. 2 sets of oilskins were hanging up to dry in their usual places, while the 3rd set was missing, suggesting that at least one of the keepers had gone outside during their final moments at the station. Most significantly, one of the lighthouse's boats was also missing from its mooring. The logbook provided the only clue to what might have happened. The final entry, dated December 15th, described a tremendous gale with heavy seas crashing over the island, conditions severe enough to threaten the lighthouse structure itself. Therefore, the lighthouse superintendent, who investigated the scene, concluded that the three men had likely ventured outside during the storm to secure equipment or check on the facility's exterior systems and had been swept away by massive waves that were battering the rocky coastline. His official report, filed in March 1901, theorized that the keepers had gone out to secure chains or other equipment that was in danger of being damaged by the storm, and that all three had been caught by a particularly large wave that dragged them into the sea. The Flannan Isles are extremely remote, surrounded by notoriously rough waters that can generate waves large enough to reach extraordinary heights during severe storms. Witness accounts confirmed that the storm on December 15th had been intense enough to flood the lower levels of the lighthouse structure. The missing boat suggested that the men might have attempted to use it for some purpose related to their duties, though whether this was part of their regular responsibilities or an emergency response to the storm, conditions remained unclear. Some details at the scene hinted at urgency or sudden departure. A chair had been overturned, and some items were scattered, possibly indicating that the men had left quickly in response to some immediate danger. No official inquiry beyond the superintendent's investigation was ever conducted, and the case was closed with the determination that all three men had accidentally lost their lives while attempting to perform their duties during dangerous weather conditions. However, the complete absence of any bodies and the mysterious circumstances surrounding their disappearance quickly captured the British public's imagination. The remote location and the fact that three experienced lighthouse keepers could simply vanish sparked wild speculation about what had really happened. Theories proposed by the press and public ranged from attacks by sea monsters to alien abduction, while some literary accounts depicted the men as being blinded by light from some supernatural source. One fantasy story even suggested paranormal forces had been responsible for their disappearance. More grounded alternative theories included the possibility of internal conflicts among the keepers. Man Men was rumored to be superstitious and possibly upset by perceived omens or hidden cases of intentional self-harm, though no evidence supported either foul play or deliberate harm. The mystery quickly inspired British poets and novelists, most notably John MacLeod's poem Flannan Isle, which helped cement the lighthouse keeper's disappearance in popular culture and folklore. Over the years, newspapers and horror magazines continued to fuel sensational speculation about supernatural causes, ensuring that the Flannan Isles mystery remained in public consciousness long after the official investigation had concluded. Subsequent research, including detailed analysis in books like Enigma of the Flannan Lighthouse by E. Ian Gordon Brown, has emphasized the storm theory and provided additional physical evidence of massive wave damage that supports the accidental death conclusion. Modern analyses largely agree with the 1901 official, finding that the three men were swept away by storm waves while attempting to secure equipment outside the lighthouse. The extreme weather conditions and the dangerous coastal environment provide a logical explanation for how three experienced men could be lost so completely. However, the eerie circumstances of their disappearance, the complete vanishing with no bodies ever recovered, the abandoned meals, and the stopped clocks continue to make this case a subject of speculation and wonder. The phrase, "like the Mary Celeste," became synonymous with mysterious disappearances. But the Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery has earned its own place in maritime lore as an example of how the sea can claim lives in ways that leave more questions than answers. Hey everyone, it's here again with a reminder to hit the like button. On March 31st, 1922, at a remote Bavarian farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, 6 people lost their lives in what would become Germany's most infamous unsolved crime. The victims included an elderly couple, their daughter, her 2 young children, and their newly hired maid, all eliminated with a farming tool, in circumstances so bizarre that the case continues to baffle investigators over a century later. The Gruber family, Andreas and Cecilia Gruber, their daughter Victoria, and Victoria's children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef, lived on the isolated farm with their maid Maria Baumgartner, who had arrived for her first day of work on the very day the attacks occurred. What made this case extraordinary wasn't just the violence that took place, but the strange events that preceded it and the killer's behavior afterward. In the weeks leading up to the attacks, neighbors reported a series of disturbing incidents that suggested someone had been watching or stalking the family. Footprints were discovered, leading from nearby woods to the farm's locked barn door, but there were no corresponding prints leading away, as if someone had approached the property and simply vanished. A mysterious newspaper appeared on the premises that none of the family members had purchased or could explain. Most unsettling of all, both the family and their previous maid had reported hearing footsteps in the attic at night. When Andreas searched the space above their living quarters, he found no one there, but the sounds continued until the previous maid became so frightened that she quit her position. Therefore, when the attacks finally occurred on the night of March 31st, it appeared that someone who had been observing the family had finally decided to act. The evidence suggested that the adult family members were lured out to the barn, one by one, where they were struck down with a mattock, a heavy farming tool used for digging. Andreas, his wife Cecilia, their daughter Victoria, and 7-year-old Cecilia were all found in the barn, their bodies stacked on top of each other as if the killer had been organizing the scene. Inside the farmhouse, Maria Baumgartner was discovered deceased in her bed, and 2-year-old Josef was found in his crib. The attack had been so violent that investigators knew they were dealing with someone driven by extreme rage or mental instability. The most heartbreaking detail was that young Cecilia had not passed away immediately. Clumps of her own hair were found clutched in her hands, which she had torn out in terror and pain before succumbing to her injuries. Despite the savage nature of the violence, nothing valuable had been stolen from the farmhouse. Large sums of money and other valuables were left in plain sight, clearly indicating that robbery had not been the motive for these brutal attacks. What happened next was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the entire case. For several days after the elimination of the family, neighbors reported seeing smoke rising from the farmhouse chimney and observed that the farm animals were being fed and cared for as if nothing had happened. Someone had remained at the property, living among the bodies, while calmly maintaining the daily routines of farm life. When the family failed to appear at school and church services, concerned neighbors finally investigated on April 4th and discovered the horrific scene. The investigation immediately focused on several potential suspects, with the most prominent being Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had been romantically involved with Victoria. There were rumors that 2-year-old Joseph might have been Lorenz's child, which could have created tension with Andreas. Adding to the suspicion was the fact that Lorenz was part of the search party that first discovered the bodies, and witnesses reported that he behaved oddly during the discovery, unlocking and locking doors as if he was familiar with the farm's layout. However, there was also a darker family secret that complicated the investigation. Andreas had previously been prosecuted for having an inappropriate relationship with his own daughter Victoria, and some community members whispered that little Josef might actually have been Andreas's child, rather than the result of Victoria's relationship with Lorenz. This scandal created multiple possible motives for revenge and made it difficult for investigators to determine which personal conflicts might have led to such extreme violence. Police repeatedly questioned Lorenz Schlittenbauer, but could never find conclusive evidence linking him to the attacks. His calm behavior during the discovery could have been the result of shock rather than guilt, and his familiarity with the farm was easily explained by his past relationship with Victoria. Alternative theories included the possibility that roaming vagrants or military deserters had committed the crimes, as the attacks occurred not long after World War I, when displaced and desperate people were common throughout the region. The evidence of the mysterious footprints and unexplained sounds in the attic suggested an even more terrifying possibility: that the attacker had been hiding on the property for days or weeks, perhaps living secretly in the attic space, while observing the family's routines before systematically eliminating them. The thought of a stranger living undetected among the family, listening to their daily conversations, and learning their habits before striking, represents one of the most chilling scenarios in criminal history. Police found what they believed was the weapon, a mattock that had been hidden in the attic months after the attacks. They also discovered the family's missing house keys scattered in the farmyard, though the significance of these items was never clearly established. Despite interviewing hundreds of people and conducting an exhaustive search for evidence, including tearing apart floorboards throughout the house, no definitive proof emerged against any specific suspect. In a desperate attempt to solve the case, authorities took the unprecedented step of removing the victims' heads during autopsies and sending them to psychics and clairvoyants, hoping that supernatural insight might succeed where conventional investigation had failed. These remains were later lost during World War II, ensuring they could never be re-examined using modern forensic techniques. The Hinterkaifeck case remains officially unsolved over 100 years later, despite periodic reviews using new investigative methods. The combination of the isolated location, the methodical elimination of an entire family, and the killer's bizarre decision to remain at the scene for days afterward creates a uniquely disturbing criminal puzzle. The farmstead was eventually demolished, but the legend of the haunted farm, where someone lived secretly in the attic, continues to send chills down the spine of anyone who learns about the case. It stands as one of history's most profound examples of how some crimes are so carefully planned and executed that they may never be fully understood or solved. On the morning of February 25th, 1957, 3 young boys exploring a wooded area in Fox Chase, Philadelphia, stumbled upon a scene that would haunt investigators for over 6 decades. Inside a shallow cardboard box lay the body of a small child, naked and severely beaten. The boy appeared to be around 4 to 6 years old, with fresh haircuts and obvious signs of long-term malnourishment. Despite his battered condition, no one could identify him. He became known simply as America's unknown child. Philadelphia police immediately launched an intensive investigation. They distributed the boy's photograph nationwide, hoping someone would recognize him. But weeks turned into months, and months turned into years, with no missing person reports matching the description. The child's hair appeared to have been recently cut, and investigators found evidence of severe skull and facial injuries. Medical examiners confirmed he had been subjected to brutal violence before his death. For decades, detectives pursued every possible lead. They analyzed paint stains found in the box, followed up on countless witness tips, and examined postcards that might be connected to the case. The investigation became Philadelphia's oldest cold case, with officers refusing to give up hope that someday they would learn the boy's identity and bring his assailant to justice. In 2022, after 65 years of mystery, advanced DNA technology finally provided the breakthrough investigators had been waiting for. Scientists extracted genetic material from the child's hair and used forensic genealogy to trace his family tree. The results were stunning. The unknown boy was identified as Joseph Augustus Zarelli, just 4 years old when his life was brutally cut short. But while Joseph's identity was finally known, the mystery was far from solved. Police confirmed that his case remains an active investigation, with a $20,000 reward still offered for information leading to an arrest. The question that haunted investigators for over half a century had been answered, but new questions emerged. Who were Joseph's parents? And why was this innocent child subjected to such horrific violence? The identification of Joseph Zarelli marked a significant victory for forensic science, but it also opened a new chapter in one of America's most enduring mysteries. Investigators now hope that with a name attached to the victim, they can finally identify the person responsible for this heinous act. Hey everyone, it's here with a quick reminder to like and subscribe if you appreciate this content. On December 4th, 1872, the crew of the Canadian merchant ship Dei Gratia made a discovery that would become one of maritime history's greatest puzzles. Drifting alone in the Atlantic Ocean near the Azores, they spotted another vessel under partial sail, with no one at the helm. Upon boarding the ship, they found the merchant brigantine Mary Celeste completely abandoned. The scene was deeply unsettling. The ship was in remarkably good condition, with its cargo of alcohol barrels intact and supplies more than adequate for the crew's needs. Navigation equipment remained in place, and there were no signs of violence or struggle. But the crew of 10, including Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, and their 2-year-old daughter, had simply vanished without a trace. The only obvious clue was a missing lifeboat and the ship's final log entry, dated 10 days earlier. 3 chests of clothing had been left behind, suggesting the crew had departed hastily, possibly during the night. Whatever had happened aboard the Mary Celeste, it had prompted experienced sailors to abandon a seaworthy vessel in the middle of the ocean. A salvage hearing was held in Gibraltar, where various theories were considered. Some suspected the Dei Gratia crew themselves of foul play, though this was later disproven. Others theorized about insurance fraud, piracy, or mutiny. However, the complete absence of missing cargo or personal belongings argued against robbery as a motive. The most plausible explanation involved the ship's cargo of denatured alcohol. Investigators theorized that fumes from the alcohol barrels may have created a panic among the crew, leading them to believe an explosion was imminent. Faced with what they perceived as mortal danger, they may have hastily abandoned ship in the lifeboat, only to be lost at sea. In the early morning hours of December 24th, 1945, George and Jenny Sauter were awakened by the smell of smoke in their Fayetteville, West Virginia home. Within minutes, flames had engulfed the roof, and the family found themselves trapped in a nightmare that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. George and Jenny, along with 4 of their 9 children, managed to escape the blaze. But 5 of their children, Maurice, 14, Martha Lee, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny Irene, 8, and Betty Dolly, 5, were nowhere to be found. As the family watched helplessly, their home was consumed by flames, and their 5 youngest children seemed to have vanished without a trace. When the fire finally burned out, volunteer searchers combed through the ashes, expecting to find remains. What they discovered instead deepened the mystery. Despite the intense heat that had destroyed the house, no bodies were found. Only some melted glass and metal remained where a 2-story home had stood just hours before. The official investigation concluded that the children had perished in the fire, and their bodies had been completely consumed by the intense heat. But George and Jenny Sauter refused to accept this explanation. They pointed to several suspicious circumstances that suggested something far more sinister had occurred. During the fire, George had tried to use a ladder to reach the 2nd floor where his children were sleeping, but the ladder was mysteriously missing from its usual location. His truck, which he planned to use to rescue the children, wouldn't start despite working perfectly the day before. Phone lines had been cut, preventing the family from calling for help immediately. Most disturbing of all, George's mother had received a strange phone call during the fire from someone who quickly hung up without speaking. Given that it was Christmas Eve in the middle of the night, no legitimate businesses would have been making calls at that hour. The Sauters suspected that their outspoken criticism of Mussolini and fascism had made them targets. George had been vocal about his opposition to the Italian dictator, and the family wondered if this had attracted the attention of criminal organizations sympathetic to the fascist cause. Convinced their children were still alive, George and Jenny launched their own investigation. They hired private detectives, offered substantial rewards for information, and even erected a billboard along a major highway, featuring photographs of their missing children and offering $5,000 for any credible leads. Years later, their persistence seemed to pay off when they received an anonymous photograph in the mail. The image showed a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to their daughter Jenny Irene, but now appeared to be in her 20s. However, attempts to trace the photograph's origin led nowhere. The Sauter family's relentless search for answers continued for decades. They replaced their destroyed home with a memorial park and kept their billboard maintained, updating it periodically with new information and increased reward offers. George and Jenny remained convinced until their deaths that their children had been kidnapped rather than lost in the fire. Despite numerous tips and leads over the years, the fate of the 5 Sauter children remains unknown. The FBI file on the case remains sealed, and modern investigators have been unable to determine whether the children died in the fire or were taken by unknown persons. The case stands as one of America's most enduring family mysteries, a testament to parents who refuse to give up hope even when faced with seemingly impossible circumstances. On the evening of February 24th, 1978, 5 young men left Chico State College after watching their favorite basketball team play. Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, Ted Weiher, and Bill Sterling were all in their 20s and had mild intellectual disabilities, but they were capable, independent individuals who regularly attended games together. The men planned to drive back to Yuba City in Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego, a journey that should have taken them south on well-traveled highways. Instead, they somehow ended up on a remote mountain road in Plumas County, over 60 miles from their intended route, in an area where snow was rapidly accumulating. 4 days later, on February 28th, authorities found Madruga's car stuck in deep snow on a desolate Forest Service road. The vehicle was still running with its lights on, but the battery was nearly dead. Inside the car, investigators found the men's belongings, including snacks they had purchased for the trip home. A single set of footprints led away from the vehicle into the snowy wilderness. What happened next would become one of the most puzzling disappearances in California history. Despite extensive searches involving mountain rescue teams and FBI agents, no trace of the 5 men could be found in the treacherous winter conditions. It wasn't until early June, after the snow had melted, that the first bodies were discovered. 3 of the men, Jack Hewitt, Jack Madruga, and Bill Sterling, were found in a ravine approximately 20 miles from their abandoned car. Their remains showed signs of animal activity, and all 3 had died from exposure to the elements. The 4th discovery was even more disturbing. Ted Weiher was found inside an abandoned fire lookout trailer that was stocked with food supplies and could have provided adequate shelter. Despite having access to provisions that could have sustained him for months, Weiher had apparently starved to death. His body showed signs of extreme weight loss, and investigators estimated he had survived in the trailer for up to 3 months before succumbing. The 5th man, Gary Mathias, was never found. His tennis shoes were discovered inside the trailer with Weiher, but Mathias himself had vanished completely. Extensive searches of the surrounding area yielded no trace of him, and his disappearance remains unsolved to this day. The case presented investigators with numerous baffling questions. How had 5 men become so disoriented that they drove 60 miles in the wrong direction? Why had they abandoned their car, which was still running and could have provided shelter? Most puzzling of all, why had Ted Weiher chosen to starve in a well-stocked shelter rather than eat the available food? Some investigators theorized that the men had become confused in a snowstorm and panicked, making a series of poor decisions that ultimately proved fatal. Others suggested that Weiher's intellectual disability may have prevented him from properly utilizing the resources available in the trailer. More controversial theories emerged from reported sightings in the area. A local hunter claimed to have seen lights and heard voices near the abandoned car on February 25th, the day after the men disappeared. The same witness reported finding a twisted metal gate nearby that resembled a crucifix, leading to speculation about a religious group or cult operating in the area. Some conspiracy theorists pointed to an unusual bright light reported in the sky on the night the men disappeared, suggesting extraterrestrial involvement. However, this light was later identified as a meteor fireball, a natural phenomenon that posed no threat to the men. The FBI investigated the case extensively, but found no evidence of foul play. Their conclusion was that the Yuba County 5 had simply gotten lost in bad weather and died from exposure after making a series of poor decisions. The case was officially classified as a misadventure rather than a criminal matter. Despite the official conclusion, the case continues to fascinate true crime enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists. The survival of Ted Weiher for months in the trailer, combined with Gary Mathias's complete disappearance, keeps the mystery alive in popular culture. For the families of the 5 men, questions remain unanswered. While 4 of the men have been found and laid to rest, Gary Mathias's fate continues to haunt his loved ones. His family still hopes for closure, even after more than 4 decades of uncertainty. The Yuba County 5 case serves as a reminder of how quickly a routine trip can turn into tragedy, and how even experienced investigators can be left with more questions than answers. Whether the truth lies in simple misadventure or something more sinister, the mystery of what happened to these 5 young men in the snowy mountains of Northern California remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in American history. On the evening of October 31st, 1969, two teenage girls made a decision that would turn Halloween night into a nightmare for their families. Patricia Spencer, 16, and Pamela Hobley, 15, left their school in Oscoda, Michigan, telling friends they planned to meet up later that evening. It was the last time anyone would see them alive. The girls were spotted around 10:30 p.m. at a local newsstand in downtown Oscoda. Witnesses reported seeing them talking with some boys earlier in the evening and boarding a bus into town. But after that final sighting at the newsstand, Patricia and Pamela simply vanished without a trace. When the girls failed to return home, their families immediately contacted police. Initially, investigators suspected the teenagers had run away together, especially after community members reported hearing the girls discuss plans to meet an Air Force serviceman in Flint, Michigan. However, both families insisted this was completely out of character. Neither girl had ever left home without permission, and both were in good standing with their families. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Patricia and Pamela weren't particularly close friends. Their decision to disappear together puzzled everyone who knew them. If they had planned to run away, why would they choose to do it with someone they weren't especially close to? The investigation revealed that several known predators were living in the county at the time. But despite extensive questioning, none were ever charged in connection with the girls' disappearance. The supposed plan to meet an Air Force serviceman and earn $40 for the trip to Flint turned out to be a red herring. No such person was ever identified. Over the years, the families received anonymous notes suggesting the girls might still be alive, but these leads never yielded any concrete evidence. Decades later, investigators used cadaver dogs to search suspected dumping sites, but nothing was found. On November 16, 1982, a Wyoming Highway Patrol officer made a disturbing discovery along an off-ramp near Saratoga. A Chevrolet Blazer sat idling with its engine running and doors wide open, 50 miles from the nearest town. Inside the vehicle, investigators found a wallet, glasses, and personal belongings, but the driver was nowhere to be seen. The abandoned SUV belonged to 35-year-old Don Kemp, a disabled former advertising executive from New York City. A single set of footprints led away from the vehicle into the snowy plains, heading straight toward a barn 6 miles away. When searchers reached the barn, they found sticks arranged as if someone had tried to start a fire, along with 3 of Kemp's socks. A massive search effort was launched immediately, but a severe blizzard forced rescue teams to halt their efforts after just 3 days. Don Kemp had seemingly walked into the wilderness during one of Wyoming's harshest winter storms and vanished completely. For 3 years, Don's fate remained a mystery. Then, in October 1985, hunters discovered skeletal remains just a few miles from where the abandoned SUV had been found. The coroner's examination revealed no signs of trauma, and the official cause of death was listed as hypothermia. According to the sheriff's department, Don Kemp had simply wandered off during the blizzard and died from exposure to the elements. But Don's mother, Mary Kemp, refused to accept this explanation. She pointed to evidence that suggested something far more sinister had occurred. 6 months after Don's disappearance, one of his friends reported receiving 6 mysterious phone messages on her answering machine. Each message contained only Don's voice, giving a number before hanging up. Phone records traced these calls to a trailer rental in Casper, Wyoming, a location over 150 miles away that Don had never mentioned to anyone. The calls were made days after Don had supposedly died in the blizzard, raising disturbing questions about what had really happened to him. Mary Kemp believed her son had been the victim of foul play, not a tragic accident. She couldn't understand why Don, despite his disability, would have intentionally walked into the wilderness during a snowstorm. The mysterious phone calls seemed to support her theory that someone else was involved in her son's disappearance. Despite Mary's suspicions and the unsettling evidence of the phone calls, no concrete proof of foul play was ever found. The official investigation concluded that Don had become disoriented, possibly due to a mental breakdown, and had wandered off to die alone in the Wyoming wilderness. The case attracted limited media attention, though it was later featured on Unsolved Mysteries. Mary Kemp died, believing her son had been the victim of a crime, having unsuccessfully petitioned the FBI to reopen the investigation after the phone message revelation came to light. Don Kemp's death remains officially classified as an accident, but the unanswered questions surrounding those mysterious phone calls continue to haunt anyone familiar with the case. Whether he truly died alone in a blizzard or met a more sinister fate remains one of Wyoming's most puzzling unsolved mysteries. In January 2013, 21-year-old Canadian student Elisa Lam checked into the Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The Cecil had a dark reputation. It had been home to serial killers Richard Ramirez and Jack Unterweger, and had seen numerous suspicious deaths over the years. But nothing in the hotel's grim history would prepare investigators for the bizarre case that was about to unfold. Elisa had been traveling alone, documenting her trip through social media posts and staying in touch with her family back in Canada. On February 1st, she had her last phone contact with her parents. When she failed to check out as scheduled, hotel staff began to worry. But it wasn't until guests started complaining about the water that the true horror of the situation became apparent. Hotel residents reported that the water pressure had dropped significantly, and worse, the tap water had developed a strange, foul taste. Some guests even mentioned that the water appeared to be discolored. Hotel maintenance was called to investigate the building's water system, and on February 19th, a worker climbed to the rooftop to check the large water tanks that supplied the building. What he found when he opened the tank hatch would shock investigators and capture the attention of the entire world. Floating in the water tank was Elisa Lam's naked, decomposed body. She had been dead for weeks, and hotel guests had unknowingly been drinking, bathing, and cooking with water contaminated by her remains. The discovery of Elisa's body was disturbing enough, but it was security footage from the hotel's elevator that turned this case into a viral internet sensation. The 2.5-minute video showed Elisa alone in the elevator, exhibiting bizarre and erratic behavior that defied explanation. In the footage, Elisa appeared to be hiding from someone, pressing herself against the elevator walls and peering cautiously around corners. She made strange hand gestures as if she were talking to invisible people, and the elevator doors opened and closed repeatedly without anyone pressing buttons or entering the car. The video was deeply unsettling, and when police released it to the public, it quickly spread across social media platforms worldwide. Internet sleuths began analyzing every frame of the elevator footage, looking for clues about what might have happened to Elisa. Some speculated that the video had been tampered with or that there were hidden doors in the elevator. Others suggested that multiple people were involved, but had been edited out of the footage. Police firmly denied that the video had been manipulated in any way. The autopsy results only deepened the mystery. The coroner ruled Elisa's death an accidental drowning, noting that she suffered from bipolar disorder, which may have contributed to the circumstances of her death. Toxicology tests revealed no illicit drugs in her system, only some over-the-counter medications and very low levels of alcohol. Notably, her prescription psychiatric medications were at very low levels, suggesting she hadn't been taking them consistently. Perhaps most puzzling was the question of how Elisa had accessed the rooftop water tanks in the first place. The roof's exterior doors were locked, and an interior staircase was protected by both an alarm system and keycard access controls. Hotel staff insisted that accessing the roof should have been impossible for a guest. Later investigations by journalists revealed that a fire escape route could potentially bypass the locked doors, and when Elisa's body was discovered, 2 of the tank lids were found open. This suggested that closing the lid from the inside wouldn't have been necessary, but it still didn't explain how she had reached the roof without triggering security systems. The simplest explanation offered by investigators was that Elisa, possibly experiencing a manic or psychotic episode related to her bipolar disorder, had somehow found her way to the roof and accidentally fallen into the open water tank. The strange behavior captured in the elevator video could have been evidence of her deteriorating mental state. However, many people remained skeptical of the official explanation. The lack of any hotel staff witnessing Elisa on the roof, combined with the mysterious circumstances surrounding her access to the restricted area, fueled numerous alternative theories. Some suggested hotel staff involvement, others pointed to the Cecil Hotel's paranormal reputation, and conspiracy theorists proposed everything from deliberate poisoning to elaborate cover-ups. The case raised serious questions about hotel security and the treatment of guests with mental health conditions. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this compilation of mysterious disappearances.